A misdialed number usually means an embarrassed apology and a quick disconnect. For Amanda Wilson, it meant the end of one life and the violent beginning of another. Cowering on her bedroom floor with fractured ribs, hiding from a high-ranking city official who promised this would be the last time she embarrassed him, she tried to text her lawyer for help. Her vision was too blurred from tears and pain. She transposed 2 digits. That message didn't reach her attorney's office phone. It reached the private, encrypted line of William Horton, the city's most feared mafia kingpin. A number reserved exclusively for his inner circle. A number that hadn't received an outside message in 5 years. What happens when a broken woman accidentally calls in the one man powerful enough to destroy her untouchable abuser? The answer is brutal, swift, and absolutely unforgiving. This is the story of the text that started a war. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The sound of a leather belt sliding through pant loops is distinct. It isn't the soft whisper of fabric. It's a deliberate, rasping hiss that promises violence. Amanda Wilson heard that sound before the first blow landed. Then the impact drove the air from her lungs in a shocked gasp, replaced by a searing pain that exploded across her ribcage. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor of the bedroom, clutching her side, her vision fracturing into dancing white spots. "You just don't learn, do you?" His voice was measured, almost bored. That was the worst part about Richard Caldwell. He didn't rage. He didn't lose control like the monsters in the crime dramas. He was a decorated city official, a man who'd spent decades mastering the art of inflicting maximum pain with minimum evidence. Usually. Tonight something had shifted. Tonight he'd stopped caring about the optics. Amanda pressed her palm against her ribs, unable to form words. Every shallow breath felt like broken glass grinding inside her chest. She looked up at him through the haze of pain. He was straightening his tie, staring down at her with the cold assessment of a man reviewing paperwork, not the woman he'd claimed to love. "I have a dinner with the mayor," Richard said, stepping over her legs as if she were furniture. "Clean yourself up. And Amanda, if you're not here when I return, I'll make sure no lawyer in this city ever takes your call." He snatched his phone from the nightstand and walked out. The bedroom door closed with a soft click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home made Amanda's heart stop. She waited. She counted her own labored heartbeats. 1 minute, 2, 3, until she heard his car pull out of the driveway. When she was certain he was gone, she dragged herself across the floor. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, a living thing that clawed at her insides with every movement. She knew what broken ribs felt like. She'd seen enough domestic violence cases during her time volunteering at the women's shelter. She needed a hospital, but she couldn't risk it. Richard had people everywhere. Nurses, administrators, even paramedics who owed him favors. They would call him. They always called him. She needed Margaret Chin, her lawyer. The only person who'd believed her when she'd first tried to leave 6 months ago. Amanda crawled toward her purse, abandoned near the closet door. Her phone was inside, the screen already cracked from last week's accident. She fumbled it free, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. 11:47 p.m. She opened her contacts, scrolling for Margaret's office emergency line. But her vision was swimming, doubling. The pain was dragging her down into a gray fog. She couldn't find the number. She'd memorized it. She could type it manually. 5550198. Her thumb, slick with sweat and trembling, slipped on the final digits. She hit 0178 instead of 0198. She didn't notice. She just needed someone to know she was dying. "He broke my ribs. Please help me." She hit send. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. Amanda leaned back against the bed frame, tears streaming down her face, each breath a fresh wave of agony. The room was tilting, darkening at the edges. She closed her eyes, praying Margaret would see the message, praying someone would come before Richard returned. Buzz. The phone vibrated against her leg. She gasped, the sudden movement sending a spike of pain through her side. He grabbed the phone, squinting at the screen. From unknown address. Now. Amanda frowned. Why was Margaret texting from an unknown number? Why was the response so cold? Maybe it was her paralegal. Maybe Margaret was in court. She typed back with shaking fingers. 1847 Riverside Drive. Code 4429. Please hurry. He's coming back. She watched the screen. 3 dots appeared, pulsing. Then they vanished. Then appeared again. For 30 agonizing seconds there was nothing. Had she texted the wrong person? Was this some stranger who would ignore a wrong number and go back to their evening? Then the phone buzzed. A single line from unknown. Don't move. I'm coming. Amanda let out a shuddering breath that was half relief, half sob. It didn't sound like Margaret. Margaret would have asked if she'd called 911, would have told her to get to safety. But maybe the lawyer was just being efficient. Maybe help was already on the way. She waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The pain was evolving, sharpening into something that made her vision pulse with every heartbeat. Her breathing was becoming rapid and shallow, each inhale weaker than the last. The bedroom walls seemed to be closing in. Suddenly, the silence of the house shattered. Crash. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't even a forceful entry. It sounded like the entire front door had been ripped off its frame. Amanda's blood turned to ice. Richard. He'd come back. He'd found out she texted someone. Tonight would be the night she became another statistic, another woman who fell down the stairs. He heard footsteps. Not one person. Many. Heavy boots moving with synchronized precision across her foyer. Clear the first floor. A man's voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the house. It was a voice like distant thunder, low, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. Secure all exits. If anyone approaches this property, you stop them. Understood. Yes, sir. Multiple voices responded in unison. Amanda stopped breathing. That wasn't Richard. That definitely wasn't Margaret. The footsteps moved closer, ascending the stairs with methodical purpose. She heard doors opening, the guest room, the bathroom, the office. They were searching the house. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom. Doors locked. She's in there. The deep voice was closer now, just on the other side of the wood. Amanda curled into herself, pressing her back against the bed frame despite the screaming pain in her ribs. She bit down on her lip to keep from whimpering. Step back. The command was quiet but absolute. Amanda squeezed her eyes shut. Please God, let it be quick. The door didn't open. It exploded inward with a single devastating kick. The deadbolt tore through the frame, sending splinters of wood raining across the carpet. Amanda screamed, throwing her arms up to shield her face. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence filled the bedroom. Amanda lowered her arms slowly, her entire body trembling. She looked up. Standing in the doorway, framed by the wreckage of her bedroom door, was a man she'd never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit that contrasted sharply with the violence of his entry. But it was his face that made her breath catch. Sharp features, cold eyes, and tattoos that crawled up his neck and disappeared beneath his collar. Behind him she could see at least 4 other men, all dressed in black, all carrying themselves like soldiers. The tattooed man's eyes scanned the room with clinical precision. Then they landed on her. For a heartbeat neither of them moved. Amanda realized with a clarity that cut through even the pain that she hadn't texted her lawyer at all. She'd texted something far more dangerous. The man took a step forward, his expression unreadable. Amanda Wilson? His voice was the same one that had commanded his men. Controlled. She nodded, too terrified to speak. His jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to where she was clutching her ribs, to the bruises already blooming across her collarbone, to the blood on her split lip. When he looked back at her face, something had shifted in his eyes. Something cold and absolutely merciless. "My name is William Horton," he said quietly. "And you just became my problem." Amanda's world tilted. She'd heard that name before. Everyone in the city had. William Horton wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't anyone you called for help unless you wanted someone to disappear. She just accidentally summoned the most dangerous man in the city. And from the look on his face as he stared at her broken body, Richard Caldwell's time on this earth had just become very, very limited. 20 minutes earlier, William Horton had been having a very different kind of evening. The basement of the Apex Club smelled like expensive cigars, aged whiskey, and the particular copper tang of fear. It was a scent William had become intimately familiar with over the 15 years he'd ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist wrapped in Italian leather gloves. The man zip-tied to the metal chair in the center of the room was crying now, which was disappointing. William preferred his interrogations to have some dignity, some backbone. But Marcus Webb had proven to be exactly what William suspected. A coward who talked big in the light and crumbled the moment shadows closed in. "I swear, Mr. Horton, I didn't know they were feds," Marcus sobbed, blood dripping from his broken nose onto his formerly white shirt. "They said they were buyers from Detroit. I swear on my mother's grave." "Your mother is alive and well in Scottsdale," William interrupted, his voice carrying the bored inflection of a man who'd heard every lie invented. "I sent her flowers last Christmas. He sent me a thank you card. Lovely woman. Far too good to have raised a rat like you." William stood with his back to the chair, studying the vintage collection of bourbon bottles lined against the exposed brick wall. His gray suit jacket was draped over a nearby pool table, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the intricate tattoos that crawled up his forearms. Serpents, skulls, roses, all woven together in black and gray ink that told the story of his rise from the streets to the summit of the city's criminal empire. Behind him, his second-in-command, Vincent Rossi, leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching with the patient stillness of a man who'd witnessed this scene dozens of times before. "Please," Marcus whimpered. "I can fix this. I can feed them bad intel. I can. You can die with whatever shred of dignity you have left, or you can keep begging." William turned, his cold eyes fixing on the traitor. "Those are your options, Marcus. Choose wisely." The room went silent except for Marcus's ragged breathing and the distant thump of music from the club above them. William's phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned. Not his regular phone. The one that rang constantly with business calls, status updates, problems that needed solving. This was his personal line. The encrypted number only 7 people in the world possessed. His mother, Vincent. His 3 most trusted lieutenants. His lawyer. His doctor. No one else. And none of them would text him during a scheduled interrogation unless it was catastrophic. William pulled the phone from his pocket, the screen illuminating his face in the dim basement light. The message was from an unknown number. That alone should have been impossible. The phone's security protocols filtered everything. He read the words once. Then again. "He broke my ribs. Please help me." The room seemed to contract around those 6 words. William's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Vincent noticed immediately, straightening from his casual lean, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Boss." William didn't answer. He was staring at the message, his mind already working through the possibilities. Some new player trying to get his attention through unorthodox means. But the phrasing, the raw desperation bleeding through even in text form, felt wrong for a setup. Whoever wrote this believed they were going to die. He'd built his empire on reading people, on sensing the difference between performance and genuine terror. This felt genuine. "Who is she?" Vincent asked quietly, reading his boss's expression with the fluency of a decade spent at his side. "I don't know." William's thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct he'd honed told him to delete the message, throw the phone in the river and go back to dealing with Marcus Webb. Getting involved in random distress calls wasn't his business. He was a criminal, not a vigilante. But something about those words, "he broke my ribs," ignited something in William that he'd thought long extinguished. A memory of his own mother years ago hiding bruises under makeup. A memory of being 8 years old and too small to stop his father's fists. A memory of the night he'd gotten big enough to make sure his father never raised his hand again. William had one rule that superseded all others in his organization. You didn't hurt women. You didn't hurt children. You didn't prey on the defenseless. He'd buried men for less. And someone somewhere in his city had just broken a woman's ribs. His fingers moved before his brain fully authorized the action. Address. Now. He hit send. Marcus had stopped crying, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Even in his terror, he recognized that something had changed, that William Horton's attention had been pulled somewhere far more dangerous than a simple traitor. The phone buzzed again. William read the address, the entry code, the desperate plea for speed. Riverside Drive. The expensive side of town. Old money. Politicians. People who thought themselves untouchable. William's expression hardened into something that made Vincent take an involuntary step forward. "Boss, what's happening?" William pocketed the phone and turned to Vincent with the cold, mechanical precision that had earned him his reputation. "Get the cars. Full tactical. 6 men. Armed. We're moving now." "What about him?" Vincent nodded toward Marcus, who was staring between them with wide, confused eyes. William glanced at the traitor as if he were a piece of furniture he'd forgotten was there. "Leave him. Carlo can clean up when we're done." He strode toward the pool table, grabbing his jacket and shrugging it on with practiced efficiency. "And Vincent, tell the men we're going in loud. I don't care who sees us." Vincent's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of his surprise. William Horton never went in loud. Discretion, shadows, plausible deniability. Those were the tools of a man who'd never spent a single night in jail despite running half the city. But tonight, discretion could wait. Tonight, someone had texted the devil for help. And William Horton always kept his promises. He typed one final message as he climbed the basement stairs, his men already mobilizing in response to Vincent's rapid-fire orders. "Don't move. I'm coming." The hunt had begun. Amanda had stopped counting her heartbeats somewhere around 300. She lay on the bedroom floor where she'd collapsed after sending the text, her body curled into itself like a question mark. The pain in her ribs had evolved from sharp agony into a dull, grinding throb that made every breath feel like drowning. The room had taken on a dreamlike quality, edges blurring, sounds becoming distant and muffled. He thought she might be dying. She thought that might be easier than what was coming when Richard returned. The house creaked around her, the familiar sounds of settling wood and distant traffic that had once meant safety, home, normalcy. Now they just marked time. Time until he came back. Time until he finished what he'd started. Amanda's phone lay on the carpet beside her hand, screen dark. Margaret hadn't responded after that strange "don't move. I'm coming." 27 minutes had passed since then. Amanda knew because she'd watched each minute tick by on the bedside clock, her vision swimming in and out of focus. Maybe Margaret wasn't coming. Maybe the lawyer had looked at the address and decided some cases weren't worth the risk. Richard Caldwell had destroyed careers for less than interfering in his private matters. Amanda closed her eyes. The darkness behind her eyelids was almost comforting. Then she heard it. The sound of a car engine. Close. Too close. Not Richard's Mercedes with its smooth, purring approach. This was something else, something deeper, more aggressive. The growl of American muscle, not German precision. Amanda's eyes snapped open. A second engine joined the first. Then a third. The sounds were distinct even through her pain-fogged mind. 3 vehicles, all large, all powerful, all moving in synchronized formation down the quiet residential street where the houses cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Tires screeched against asphalt. The sound shattered the night like breaking glass. 3 vehicles braking hard, fast, with the violent precision of a military operation. Amanda felt the vibration through the floor, felt it in her bones. These weren't careful, polite vehicles parking at a curb. These were predators arriving at a kill. Her heart began to hammer against her broken ribs, sending fresh waves of pain through her chest. Car doors opened. Not the soft click of luxury sedans, but the heavy thunk of reinforced steel. 1, 2, 3, 4, she lost count. At least 8 doors. Maybe more. Amanda tried to sit up, her body screaming in protest. She managed to prop herself against the bed frame, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Through the bedroom window she could see lights. Headlights still on, high beams cutting through the manicured hedges of the front yard like searchlights. Boot heels hit pavement in rapid succession. The sound was organized, disciplined. Not Margaret. Not the police. Something else entirely. Secure the perimeter. A man's voice carried through the night air, deep and commanding. 2 on the back entrance. Carlo, you're on the street. No one gets in or out without my say. Yes, sir. Amanda's blood turned to ice water. She'd made a terrible mistake. The wrong number. She'd texted the wrong number, and now someone was here, and they weren't lawyers or paramedics or anyone who would help her. They were. The front door exploded inward downstairs with a crash that made the entire house shudder. Amanda bit back a scream, pressing her hand against her mouth. This wasn't Margaret Chin. This wasn't anyone who should be breaking down doors in the middle of the night. Clear the first floor. That same authoritative voice, now inside her house, echoing up the stairwell. Secure all exits. If anyone approaches this property, you stop them. Understood. Yes, sir. Multiple voices responded in unison, sharp and military. Heavy footsteps moved through her home with purpose. Through the foyer, the living room, the kitchen. She heard furniture being moved, doors being opened and cleared. Professional. Systematic. Terrifying. Amanda's mind raced through the possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Richard had hired someone to finish the job. This was a hit squad. She was going to die in her bedroom, and they'd make it look like a home invasion, and Richard would play the grieving partner at her funeral. Or worse. Maybe she texted someone dangerous by accident, some criminal whose number she'd stumbled into, and now they were here to silence the witness who'd seen their private line. The footsteps reached the stairs. Multiple sets, moving in formation, ascending with the measured pace of men who'd done this before. Amanda tried to crawl, tried to move anywhere that wasn't here, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The pain lanced through her side and she collapsed back against the bed frame with a whimper she couldn't suppress. The footsteps stopped. Did you hear that? Second floor. East wing. They'd heard her. They knew exactly where she was. Amanda's vision blurred with tears. She'd survived Richard's fists for 2 years. She'd endured the gaslighting, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her sense of self. She'd finally found the courage to reach out for help. And she'd accidentally called in her own executioners. The footsteps resumed, closer now, moving down the hallway toward her bedroom. She could hear them testing doorknobs. The guest room, the bathroom, Richard's office. They stopped outside her door. Doors locked. Pause. Then a different voice, the one that had been giving orders. The one that sounded like gravel and gunpowder. She's in there. Amanda pressed herself harder against the bed frame, as if she could somehow merge with the furniture and disappear. Her fingers found the phone, clutching it like a lifeline even though it had led her here to this moment, to whatever was about to happen. Step back. The command was quiet but absolute. Amanda squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body shaking. She thought about her mother who died when Amanda was 17. She thought about the life she'd imagined before Richard. The career in social work, the little apartment with plants in the windows, the quiet, gentle existence she'd craved. She thought about how stupid she'd been to believe a text message could save her. The door exploded inward. The deadbolt tore through the wooden frame like it was paper, sending splinters raining across the carpet in a violent spray. Amanda screamed, throwing her arms up to shield her face from the debris, her broken ribs shrieking in protest. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence filled the bedroom. Slowly, Amanda lowered her arms and looked up at the wreckage of her bedroom door. Standing in the doorway was a man she had never seen before in her life. And from the cold fury in his tattooed face as his eyes swept over her broken body, Amanda realized that sometimes the wrong number was exactly the right one. William Horton had seen violence in every form it could take. He'd witnessed executions, interrogations, desperate last stands, and calculated eliminations. He'd ordered some of them himself. In his world, brutality was a language and he was fluent in every dialect. But standing in the doorway of Amanda Wilson's bedroom, looking down at the broken woman curled against the bed frame, something shifted in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Rage. Not the hot, impulsive kind that made men sloppy. This was the cold, methodical fury that had built his empire. The kind that calculated trajectories and consequences, that planned 3 moves ahead, that turned vengeance into an art form. Amanda stared up at him with eyes too wide, too terrified. Mascara streaked down her bruised face. Her brown sweater was torn at the shoulder, her breathing shallow and labored. The way she held her left side told William everything he needed to know about her ribs. The purple bruising blooming across her collarbone told him this wasn't the first time. Amanda Wilson? His voice came out softer than he intended, though it still carried the weight of absolute authority. She nodded, a jerky, frightened movement that made her wince. William's jaw tightened. Behind him, he heard Vincent's sharp intake of breath as his second-in-command took in the scene. Vincent had been with William long enough to know what happened when someone crossed the line from business into personal. And this woman, whoever she was, had just become deeply personal. "My name is William Horton," he said, keeping his voice level, controlled. "And you just became my problem." The recognition that flickered across her face would have been amusing under different circumstances. Everyone in the city knew his name, even if they'd never seen his face. William Horton was the monster parents warned their children about, the name whispered in backrooms and boardrooms alike. Amanda's voice cracked. She tried again. "I didn't mean to, I was trying to reach my lawyer." "I know." William stepped into the room, his movements deliberate, non-threatening despite the violence of his entry. "You sent a text to the wrong number. You got mine instead." He crouched down to her level, his tailored gray suit pulling tight across his shoulders. This close, Amanda could see the full extent of his tattoos, intricate black and gray designs that crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, disappearing into his slicked-back hair. Serpents and skulls, crosses and roses, each one a chapter in a story written in ink and blood. "Look at me," William commanded quietly. Amanda's eyes, which had been darting toward the door, the window, anywhere but his face, reluctantly met his gaze. "I need you to answer a question and I need you to be honest. Can you do that?" She nodded again, barely. "Who did this to you?" Amanda's lips trembled. For a moment, William thought she might lie, might give him the same excuse he'd heard 1,000 times. She fell, she was clumsy, it was an accident. But something in his expression must have told her that lies wouldn't work here, that he'd already decided to involve himself and nothing she said would change that. "Richard Caldwell," she whispered. "He's a city comptroller," William finished, his tone flat. "I know who he is." Of course he did. William made it his business to know every person of power in the city, every politician, every judge, every official who might someday become useful or problematic. Richard Caldwell was both. A man who'd built his career on a reputation for fiscal responsibility and family values, who smiled for cameras and gave speeches about accountability. A man who apparently beat women behind closed doors. William stood, pulling his phone from his pocket. He touched a button and Vincent's phone buzzed immediately. Run a full background on Richard Caldwell. Everything. Where he is right now, where he'll be in the next 2 hours, who he's with, what he's driving. I want his entire life mapped out before midnight. On it, boss. Vincent disappeared into the hallway, already making calls. William turned his attention back to Amanda. She was watching him with an expression caught between terror and something that might have been hope. He'd seen that look before on the faces of people who'd been pushed so far past their limits that even the devil looked like salvation. Can you walk? He asked. I don't know. My ribs. I'm going to have my medic look at you. He's discreet. He won't ask questions. William moved to the doorway, gesturing to someone in the hall. A younger man appeared, maybe 30, with the lean build of a runner and the steady hands of someone who'd done field medicine. Marco, she's got broken ribs, possibly punctured lung. Assess her. Marco moved past William with a medical kit, kneeling beside Amanda with the practiced calm of a professional. Ma'am, I'm going to need to check your breathing. This might hurt. While Marco worked, William stepped into the hallway where 3 of his men stood at attention. They were all dressed in black tactical gear, each carrying themselves with the coiled readiness of soldiers. This was his inner circle, the men who'd followed him through wars both literal and metaphorical. Status, William said. Perimeter secure, boss. This from Carlo, a bull of a man with scarred knuckles and loyal eyes. No sign of the boyfriend. Neighbors called the police about the noise. 2 squad cars en route, ETA 4 minutes. William's expression didn't change. Let them come. Have them meet me outside. Carlo's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he nodded, speaking quietly into his radio. William walked back into the bedroom. Marco was wrapping Amanda's ribs with practiced efficiency, his movements gentle but thorough. 2 fractured ribs, possible internal bleeding, Marco reported without looking up. She needs a hospital, Mr. Horton. This is beyond field treatment. No hospitals, Amanda gasped, panic flooding her voice. He has people, they'll call him. He won't be a problem anymore. William's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who'd made a decision. He looked at Marco. Can you stabilize her for transport? Sir. But she needs proper medical care within the next few hours. She'll have it. William pulled out his phone again, typing rapidly. Within seconds he received a confirmation. I have a private physician. He'll meet us at my property. Amanda was staring at him now with undisguised confusion. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. William met her gaze, and for just a moment, the mask of the ruthless crime lord slipped enough to reveal something human underneath. Because someone should have helped my mother, he said quietly. And no one did. The sound of sirens cut through the night air, growing closer. William straightened his suit jacket with a sharp tug. Marco, get her ready to move. The rest of you with me. He walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs with the calm, measured pace of a man who owned everything he surveyed. His men fell into formation behind him, a silent wall of muscle and menace. The front door hung broken on its hinges. William stepped through it onto the well-manicured lawn just as 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt at the curb, their lights painting the entire street in alternating blues and reds. 4 officers emerged, hands on their weapons, faces caught between protocol and the very real recognition of who they were facing. William Horton stood in front of 3 idling black SUVs, backlit by their headlights, his tattooed neck and sharp suit creating a contrast that was both elegant and terrifying. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't move at all. He just waited with the patience of a predator who knew the prey had already lost. Richard Caldwell was having an excellent evening. The dinner with Mayor Thornton had gone exactly as planned. 3 courses of strategic conversation, 2 glasses of perfectly aged scotch, and 1 verbal commitment to support Richard's upcoming campaign for state treasurer. By this time next year he'd be positioning himself for a gubernatorial run. By 45 he'd be untouchable. He pulled his Mercedes into the driveway of his Riverside Drive home at exactly 11:43 p.m., pleased with his timing. Late enough that Amanda would have cleaned herself up and learned her lesson. Early enough that he could still catch the late sports recap. The house was dark except for the porch light. Good. She'd probably cried herself to sleep like she always did after their disagreements. Richard had learned years ago that the silent treatment following correction was more effective than any apology. Let her stew in it. Let her remember who controlled every aspect of her miserable little life. He grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, already mentally composing tomorrow's schedule. Budget committee at 9, lunch with the Chamber of Commerce, evening drinks with... Richard stopped. The front door was open. Not just unlocked. Open, hanging at an odd angle, the frame splintered around the deadbolt. His first thought was robbery. His second thought was Amanda, and a cold spike of fear shot through him. If she'd run, if she'd gone to the police, if she'd done something stupid. He pulled his phone from his pocket, already dialing his contact at the precinct, when a voice cut through the darkness. Richard Caldwell. It wasn't a question. Richard spun toward the sound. A man stood near the hedges bordering his property, barely visible in the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, utterly still. Not a neighbor. Not a cop. Something else. Who the hell are you? Richard demanded, his voice carrying the automatic authority of a man used to being obeyed. This is private property. I'm calling. No, you're not. The man stepped into the light spilling from the porch. Richard's words died in his throat. The stranger was dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than Richard's car payment, but it was the tattoos that commanded attention. Intricate black ink crawling up his neck from beneath his collar, disappearing into his slicked back hair. His face was all sharp angles and colder eyes, the kind of face that belonged in a different world than Riverside Drive's manicured lawns and homeowners associations. Richard's political instincts kicked in, the ones that had helped him navigate 2 decades of city bureaucracy. This was a problem. A significant one. But problems could be managed. Look, I don't know what this is about, but I'm a city official. Whatever you think. I know exactly who you are. William Horton closed the distance between them with 3 measured steps. I know you're the city comptroller. I know you sit on 4 committees. I know you're planning a run for state treasurer. He stopped directly in front of Richard, close enough that the city official could smell expensive cologne and something underneath it. Gunpowder, maybe, or the particular musk of violence recently committed. I also know you broke Amanda Wilson's ribs tonight, William continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. Among other things. Richard's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know Amanda's name? A boyfriend? Impossible. Richard monitored her phone, her email, her every movement. A private investigator? Hired by whom? I don't know who fed you that story, Richard said, forcing his voice into the smooth, reasonable tone that worked so well in depositions. But Amanda is mentally unstable. She's hurt herself before. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses treatment. If she's told you... William's fist caught Richard in the solar plexus with surgical precision. The air exploded from Richard's lungs. He doubled over, gasping, his briefcase clattering to the driveway. He'd been in exactly 2 fights in his entire life, both in middle school, both ending with him running to a teacher. He'd forgotten what real violence felt like. William didn't give him time to remember. His knee came up, catching Richard in the face. Richard heard his nose break before he felt it, that wet crunch of cartilage giving way. Blood exploded across his expensive tie. He stumbled backward, his vision going white with pain and shock. I don't want your excuses. William's voice remained level, almost bored. He grabbed Richard by his collar, the expensive fabric bunching in his tattooed fist. I don't want your lies. I don't want whatever story you've convinced yourself makes this acceptable. He threw Richard against the Mercedes hard enough to dent the door panel. Richard's back screamed in protest, his legs giving out. He slid down the side of his own car, leaving a smear of blood on the pristine black paint. Please, Richard choked out, the word foreign in his mouth. He'd never begged for anything in his life. Please, I can pay you. Whatever she's paying you, I'll double it. Triple it. I have connections. I can make you. William crouched down to Richard's level, his expression utterly empty of mercy. You can't make me anything, he said quietly. But I'm going to make you something. I'm going to make you an example. Richard tried to crawl away, his politician's mind finally understanding that this wasn't negotiation, wasn't politics, wasn't anything he knew how to navigate. This was something primal and final. William grabbed him by the ankle and dragged him back with casual strength. Richard's fingers scrabbled against the concrete driveway, his expensive watch scraping, his manicured nails breaking. Every man in this city who thinks he can put his hands on a woman and walk away, William said, pulling Richard up by his collar again, is going to hear your name. They're going to hear what happened to Richard Caldwell. And they're going to think twice. He hit Richard again, precisely, methodically, not with rage but with the calculated efficiency of a craftsman who'd perfected his trade. Ribs. Kidney. Each blow placed exactly where it would cause maximum pain without killing. Not yet. Richard stopped trying to speak. He could only gasp and bleed and pray for unconsciousness. Behind them, one of William's SUVs idled at the curb, its headlights illuminating the scene like a stage. Inside that vehicle, Amanda Wilson watched through tinted glass, her broken ribs wrapped, her face pale. She watched the man who'd terrorized her for 2 years reduced to a whimpering heap on his own driveway. She watched William Horton dismantle her abuser with the same calm expression someone might wear while reviewing paperwork. And for the first time in 2 years, Amanda Wilson felt something she'd thought was dead. Hope. William landed one final blow, Richard's head snapping back, his body going limp. The city official crumpled to the concrete, breathing but barely conscious. William straightened, adjusting his suit jacket with a sharp tug. He turned toward the SUV, toward Amanda's pale face in the window, and nodded once. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Vincent. Send the cleanup crew to 1847 Riverside Drive. We have a package that needs long-term storage. He ended the call and walked toward his vehicle, leaving Richard Caldwell bleeding on the driveway of his perfect house, in his perfect neighborhood, where everything had always gone according to his perfect plan. Until tonight. Until he'd made the mistake of hurting someone who accidentally summoned the one man in the city who didn't care about political connections or careful reputations or the rules that protected men like him. William Horton opened the SUV door and climbed inside. Let's go, he said quietly. The convoy pulled away into the night, leaving Richard Caldwell to contemplate the very expensive lesson that some debts get paid in blood. Amanda had watched William Horton destroy Richard Caldwell through the tinted window of the SUV, and somewhere during those brutal, efficient minutes, her mind had simply shut down. Not from horror. She'd expected to feel horror, guilt, maybe even pity for the man who'd terrorized her for 2 years. Instead, she felt nothing, just a vast, empty numbness that spread through her chest like Novocaine. The pain in her ribs had faded to a distant throb, her vision swimming in and out of focus as shock pulled her deeper into its merciful embrace. Marco, the medic, had tried to keep her alert, asking her questions about her name, the date, where she was. Amanda had answered in monosyllables until the words stopped making sense, until the inside of the SUV became a blur of leather and dim lights and voices that sounded like they were speaking underwater. She didn't remember the convoy moving back to her house. She didn't remember the journey upstairs to her bedroom, didn't remember Marco checking her vitals again with increasing urgency. She only remembered the feeling of falling, of her body giving up after running on pure adrenaline for too long. The world went dark. When William stepped back into Amanda's bedroom, Marco was kneeling beside her unconscious form, his fingers pressed to her neck, his expression tight with concern. "She's in shock," Marco reported without looking up. "Pulses thready, breathing shallow. We need to move her now, Mr. Horton. She's crashing." William moved without hesitation. He'd carried wounded men before, had extracted targets from hostile territory, had learned years ago how to lift dead weight efficiently. But something about Amanda Wilson's small, broken form made him pause for just a fraction of a second. She looked even younger unconscious, her face slack and pale beneath the bruising that painted her cheekbone in shades of purple and yellow. Her brown sweater was torn at the shoulder, revealing more bruises underneath, old ones faded to green and yellow layered beneath the fresh injuries. Her jeans were smudged with blood and dirt from where she'd crawled across the floor. This wasn't the first time Richard Caldwell had hurt her. It was just the first time he'd been caught. William crouched down and slid one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. He lifted her in a single smooth motion, rising to his full height with Amanda cradled against his chest. She was lighter than he'd expected, her body almost fragile in his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, a small sound escaping her lips. Not quite a whimper, not quite a sigh. Something broken and unconscious and entirely vulnerable. "Boss." Vincent appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "The police are getting restless. Officer Daniels is asking questions. Says he needs to speak with Miss Wilson before we can leave." William's jaw tightened. "Tell Officer Daniels that Miss Wilson is unconscious and requires immediate medical attention. Tell him if he wants to file a report, he can do it tomorrow after she's stable." "He's not going to like that." "I don't care what he likes." William adjusted his grip on Amanda, making sure her injured ribs weren't compressed against his chest. "Clear a path. We're leaving. Now." Vincent nodded and disappeared back down the hallway. William heard him barking orders, heard the responding shuffle of boots as his men repositioned. William moved toward the stairs, his steps measured and careful. Amanda's breathing was too shallow, her skin too cold. Marco followed close behind, medical kit in hand, his eyes never leaving his patient. The staircase was narrow, forcing William to angle his body to keep from jostling Amanda against the walls. Each step down was deliberate, controlled. He'd carried cargo worth millions through hostile territory with less care. At the bottom of the stairs, the scene that greeted him would have been almost comical under different circumstances. 4 police officers stood in the destroyed foyer, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed fear. They were young, probably 5 years on the force, maybe less. The kind of cops who still believed the badge meant something, who hadn't yet learned that real power in the city had nothing to do with uniforms and everything to do with money, influence, and the willingness to use violence. Officer Daniels stood at the front, his hand resting on his service weapon but not drawing it. He was smart enough to know that would be suicide. Behind the officers, visible through the broken front door, William's men had formed a semicircle around the property. 6 of them, all armed, all watching the police with the patient stillness of predators waiting for the signal to strike. The 3 black SUVs idled at the curb, their engines rumbling, their headlights cutting through the night like searchlights. William walked through the foyer with Amanda in his arms, his tattooed neck and sharp gray suit creating a striking contrast against her brown sweater and bruised face. He didn't slow down. He didn't ask for permission. Officer Daniels stepped into his path. "Mr. Horton." The officer's voice was admirably steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "I need to speak with Miss Wilson. We received a call about a disturbance and we need to. She's unconscious." William's tone allowed no argument. "She has broken ribs and possible internal bleeding. I'm taking her to receive medical attention. Sir, we need to take her statement. We need to understand what happened here tonight." William stopped walking. The movement was so sudden, so absolute, that everyone in the foyer seemed to hold their breath simultaneously. He looked down at Officer Daniels with the cold, empty gaze of a man who'd ordered executions before breakfast and slept soundly afterward. "What happened here," William said quietly, "is that Richard Caldwell beat this woman nearly to death in her own home. What's happening now is that I'm making sure she survives the night. What's going to happen next depends entirely on whether you step aside or whether we have a problem." The unspoken threat hung in the air like smoke. Officer Daniels looked at Amanda's unconscious form, at the bruises covering her face, at the way her breathing came in shallow, pained gasps even in sleep. Then he looked at the 6 armed men standing behind William Horton, at the SUVs waiting with doors already open, at the scene of violence that had clearly already concluded. He made the smart choice. He stepped aside. "I'll need to file a report," Daniels said, his voice tight. "File whatever you want." William moved past him, heading for the front door. "Just make sure you spell Richard Caldwell's name correctly." He walked down the porch steps and across the lawn, his men parting to let him through. The night air was cold against his face, carrying the scent of cut grass and expensive neighborhood silence. Carlos stood by the middle SUV, holding the rear door open. William approached carefully, ducking his head as he maneuvered Amanda's unconscious body into the vehicle. He laid her across the back seat with the same precision he'd used to lift her, making sure her head was supported, her ribs protected. Marco climbed in from the other side, immediately resuming his medical assessment, pulling out an IV kit and oxygen monitor. William stood outside the vehicle for a moment, looking down at Amanda Wilson, the woman who'd sent a desperate text to a wrong number and accidentally summoned the city's most dangerous man. She looked small in the large leather seat, her brown sweater stained with blood and tears, her face a canvas of violence. But she was breathing. She was alive. And as long as William Horton had anything to say about it, she would stay that way. He climbed into the SUV beside her, pulling the door shut with a solid thunk. "Drive," he said quietly. The convoy pulled away from 1847 Riverside Drive, leaving behind the broken door, the terrified police officers, and the perfect facade of a house that had hidden horrors for far too long. Amanda Wilson was leaving her old life behind. She just didn't know yet that she'd never be going back. The interior of the SUV smelled like leather and antiseptic. Marco worked with quiet efficiency, his hands steady as he inserted an IV line into Amanda's arm, the clear fluid dripping slowly into her veins. The oxygen monitor clipped to her finger beeped steadily, the numbers displayed on the small screen lower than they should be. William sat in the seat across from her, his eyes cataloging every injury with the methodical precision of a man conducting inventory. Under the vehicle's dome light, Amanda's condition was impossible to ignore. The bruises on her face were the most obvious, the swollen cheekbone painted in shades of purple and black, the split lip that had bled down her chin, the discoloration around her left eye that suggested the blow had been recent. Hours, not days. But it was the other injuries that made William's hands curl into fists. Marco had cut away part of Amanda's brown sweater to access her ribs, and the exposed skin told a story that made William's jaw tighten with barely controlled fury. The fresh bruising across her ribcage was extensive, dark purple spreading like spilled ink across her pale skin. But beneath it, barely visible in the dim light, were older bruises, faded yellows and greens that formed a timeline of violence. Weeks, maybe months. This hadn't been a single incident. This had been systematic, calculated. A pattern of abuse that Richard Caldwell had carefully hidden beneath expensive suits and political handshakes. Internal bleeding? William asked, his voice low. Marco pressed gently on Amanda's abdomen, watching her face for reactions even in unconsciousness. She flinched, a small whimper escaping her lips. "Likely," Marco confirmed. "The bruising here suggests kidney trauma. Could be a ruptured spleen. I won't know for certain until Dr. Chen can do a full scan, but the signs are bad, Mr. Horton. She needs surgery. Soon." William pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. Dr. Victoria Chen was already waiting at his estate, her private surgical suite prepared. She was one of the few people in the city who knew exactly who William Horton was and continued to take his calls anyway. She'd patched up more of his men than he could count, had performed operations that would never appear in any official record. She owed him nothing and everything depending on how you counted debts. His phone buzzed with her reply. Ready when you arrive. William glanced at the driver. How long? 15 minutes, boss. Maybe 12 if I push it. Push it. The SUV accelerated, the engine's growl deepening as they merged onto the highway. The other two vehicles fell into formation. One ahead, one behind, creating a mobile fortress around Amanda's fragile life. William returned his attention to her unconscious form. She'd shifted slightly during Marco's examination, her head turning toward the window, her dark hair falling across her bruised face. Even in sleep, even in shock, her expression carried a tension that spoke of years spent bracing for the next blow. He'd seen that expression before. On his mother's face back when his father was still alive. Back when William was too young to do anything except hide in his room and pretend he couldn't hear the sounds of violence through thin apartment walls. He'd promised himself after his father's funeral, after the accident that had sent the old man's car off a bridge, that he would never be powerless again. That he would build something so strong, so absolute, that no one could ever hurt the people under his protection. He'd built an empire on that promise. And now Amanda Wilson had accidentally become part of it. The SUV's back door opened at a red light and Vincent climbed in, his face grim. He'd been coordinating with the cleanup crew at Richard Caldwell's house, managing the logistics of making a city official disappear without triggering a city-wide manhunt. Status, William said without looking away from Amanda. Caldwell is secured. The house is clean. We've got him in the warehouse on 5th. Vincent paused, choosing his words carefully. He's conscious. Asking for his lawyer. Making threats about what happens when people find out we took him. William's expression didn't change. What did you tell him? Nothing. Figured you'd want to handle that conversation personally. For a long moment William said nothing. He watched Amanda's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. Watched the 4-drip medication into her bloodstream, watched Marco monitor her vitals with increasing concern. Richard Caldwell had done this. Had systematically broken this woman over months or years, had beaten her until her ribs cracked, had left her bleeding on her bedroom floor expecting her to simply accept it. Expecting her to be too afraid to ask for help. She had asked for help. She just asked the wrong number. Or perhaps exactly the right one. William turned to Vincent, and his second-in-command recognized the expression immediately. It was the look William got before someone died. Not the hot rage of impulse, but the cold certainty of a decision already made and catalogued as complete. Make sure he never sees the sun again, William said quietly. Vincent didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need to. In their world that phrase had only one meaning. Richard Caldwell would disappear into the city's underground network of people who'd angered William Horton. He would exist in a cell somewhere dark and forgotten, kept alive but stripped of everything that made him feel human. His freedom, his dignity, his belief that money and power made him untouchable. He would never attend another city council meeting. Never shake another hand at a fundraiser. Never put his hands on another woman. He would simply cease to exist in any way that mattered. Understood, boss. Vincent pulled out his own phone, already typing instructions to the men guarding their newest prisoner. What about the political fallout? He'll be missed. People will ask questions. Let them ask. William's voice carried the absolute confidence of a man who'd weathered bigger storms. Richard Caldwell was an abuser who finally picked the wrong victim. If the city wants to go looking for him, they can start by asking his colleagues why no one noticed what he was doing to the woman he lived with. Vincent nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. You're going to burn his reputation. I'm going to bury it. William looked back at Amanda, at the evidence of systematic torture written across her body. By the time I'm done, Richard Caldwell's name will be synonymous with the kind of monster even other monsters despise. The SUV turned off the highway, navigating the winding private road that led to William's estate. Through the window, Amanda could see walls appearing, high, topped with security cameras and discreet deterrents for anyone foolish enough to attempt entry. Marco began packing up his medical kit, preparing for the handoff to Dr. Chin. We're close, Mr. Horton. She's stable for now, but that could change quickly. William reached across the space between them and adjusted the blanket Marco had draped over Amanda's legs, a gesture so gentle it seemed to belong to a different man entirely. She's going to live, he said, and it wasn't a hope or a prayer. It was a command. The SUV pulled through the estate gates, and William Horton carried Amanda Wilson into her new life, one where the monsters who'd hurt her would never reach her again. Because the biggest monster of all had just claimed her as his own. Amanda woke to the smell of cedar and something else. Expensive cologne, the kind that came in heavy glass bottles with French names she couldn't pronounce. For a moment, suspended in that space between sleep and consciousness, she thought she was in a hotel. Then the pain hit. Not the sharp, gasping agony of broken ribs, but a dull, manageable ache that spoke of serious medication and professional medical care. She tried to move and felt the pull of an N4 line in her arm, heard the steady beep of a heart monitor somewhere to her left. Her eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar ceiling, high, coffered, painted in a warm cream that suggested old money and older tastes. A chandelier hung above her, crystal and wrought iron, its lights dimmed to a soft glow. This wasn't a hospital. Amanda turned her head carefully, her neck stiff, and took in the room. It was large, larger than her entire apartment had been before Richard. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, the furniture antique and obviously expensive. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind an ornate screen. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed darkness outside, though she could see the faint outline of manicured grounds beyond the glass. She was in a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, wrapped in sheets with a thread count she couldn't begin to calculate. Her brown sweater was gone, replaced by a soft cotton hospital gown. Her ribs were wrapped in clean white bandages, her left hand taped where the 4 entered her vein. The last thing she remembered was the SUV, the medic's worried face, William Horton's cold eyes staring at her broken body. William Horton. The memory crashed back with the force of a physical blow. The wrong number. The violent rescue. Richard on his driveway, bleeding and broken. The realization that she'd accidentally summoned the city's most feared crime lord. You're awake. Amanda's head snapped toward the voice, the movement sending a spike of pain through her neck. She bit back a gasp. William Horton sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, so still she hadn't noticed him in the shadows. He was dressed differently now, the gray suit replaced by dark slacks and a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing the full extent of his tattoos. In the firelight, the ink seemed to move across his skin, serpents and skulls dancing with the flames. Don't move too quickly, he said, his voice carrying none of the cold command from the night before. You had surgery 3 hours ago. Dr. Chin repaired your spleen and set your ribs. You're going to be sore for a while. Amanda stared at him, her mind struggling to process the surreal situation. A mafia boss was sitting in a chair telling her about her surgery as if this were a normal hospital visit and not, whatever this was. Where am I? Her voice came out hoarse, her throat raw. My estate. About 40 minutes outside the city. William stood, moving with fluid grace toward a side table where a pitcher of water sat next to a glass. He poured carefully, then approached the bed. Can you sit up? Amanda tried, her abdominal muscles screaming in protest. William set the glass down and moved to help her, his hands gentle but impersonal as he adjusted the pillows behind her back, raising her to a sitting position with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Once she was settled, he handed her the water. Amanda took it with shaking hands, taking small sips that felt like heaven on her parched throat. She watched him over the rim of the glass, this tattooed stranger who'd kicked down her door and carried her out of hell. In the soft light of the bedroom, without the adrenaline and terror of the night before, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, mid-30s maybe. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, but there was something in his eyes that contradicted the violence she'd witnessed. Not kindness exactly, but a complexity she hadn't expected. "Richard?" she asked quietly, not sure she wanted the answer. "Alive. For now." William returned to his chair, settling back into it with the casual authority of a man who owned everything he touched. "He's somewhere he can't hurt anyone else. That's all you need to know." Amanda should have felt horror at the implications. She should have demanded to call the police, should have insisted on proper legal channels and due process. But all she felt was a bone-deep relief that made her hands tremble around the water glass. "Why did you help me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. I'm nobody." William's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been anger flickering across his features. "You're not nobody. Don't ever say that again." The command in his voice made her flinch, an automatic response to male anger that she hated but couldn't control. William noticed immediately, his jaw tightening. "I'm not going to hurt you, Amanda." He said her name like he'd been using it for years, not hours. "I know you have no reason to believe that, but it's true. No one in this house will ever hurt you. But you hurt Richard. Richard Caldwell broke your ribs and left you bleeding on your bedroom floor." William's voice remained level, but something cold entered his eyes. "He's been beating you for months, maybe years." "Yes, I hurt him. I'd do it again. I'd do worse." Amanda looked down at the water glass, at her own reflection distorted in the liquid. "I tried to leave once. 6 months ago. He found me at a shelter. Convinced them I was having a mental health crisis. Took me home and..." Her voice broke. "I stopped trying after that. You won't have to try anymore." William leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his tattooed hands clasped together. "I meant what I said last night. You're my problem now. That means you're under my protection. It means Richard Caldwell and anyone like him will never touch you again." "I don't understand." Amanda shook her head, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through her skull. "Why would you do this? I sent you a text by mistake. You could have just ignored it. You could have. My mother was in your position once." The words came out flat, final, as if speaking them caused physical pain. "She sent me to stay with my grandmother one weekend. When I came back, she was dead. The official report said she fell down the stairs. My father was a respected businessman. Everyone believed him." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "How old were you?" Amanda asked softly. 13. William's expression was unreadable. "Old enough to know what really happened. Too young to do anything about it. I made a promise at her funeral that I would never be powerless again. That I would build something strong enough that no one could ever hurt the people under my protection." He looked at Amanda directly and she saw the truth in his eyes. The boy who'd lost his mother, the man who'd built an empire on that loss. The monster who protected the defenseless with the same brutality he used to destroy his enemies. "You texted the wrong number," William said quietly. "But you reached exactly the right person." Amanda felt something shift in her chest. Some weight she'd been carrying for 2 years finally beginning to lift. She didn't know if she could trust this man, this criminal who'd literally carried her out of her nightmare. She didn't know if this was rescue or just a different kind of prison. But for the first time in years she felt safe. And that was enough to make her voice steady when she spoke. "Thank you." William nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged her gratitude without accepting it as sufficient payment for what he'd done. "Get some rest," he said, standing. "Dr. Chin will check on you in the morning. If you need anything before then, there's a call button on the nightstand." Someone will come immediately. He moved toward the door, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. William. He stopped, turning back to face her. What happens now? Amanda asked, the question encompassing everything. Her recovery, her future, the life she'd left behind. William considered her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Now, he said finally. Now you heal. Everything else we'll figure out together. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Amanda alone in a room that smelled of expensive cologne and old money, in a house belonging to the most dangerous man in the city. The man who'd saved her life. William's office occupied the entire west wing of the estate, a sprawling space that combined the aesthetics of a gentleman's study with the functionality of a military command center. Mahogany bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with first editions and legal texts that actually got used. The other walls held monitors, 6 of them, displaying everything from stock tickers to security camera feeds to encrypted communication channels. It was 3 in the morning, and William sat behind his desk with a cup of black coffee and a tablet displaying Richard Caldwell's entire digital existence. Vincent stood nearby, his own laptop open, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. Behind them, 2 other men worked at a secondary workstation. Marcus Chin, their tech specialist, and David Torres, their inside man at City Hall. Police report filed at 11:47 p.m., Marcus said, his eyes scanning lines of code. Officers Daniels and Morrison responded to a disturbance call at 1847 Riverside Drive. They noted a broken door, signs of a struggle, and the presence of one Amanda Wilson being treated for injuries. They also noted your presence, boss, which they diplomatically described as concerned citizen rendering aid. Creative, Vincent murmured. Report was submitted to their sergeant at 12:15 a.m., Marcus continued. It's in the system, but it hasn't been processed yet. I can have it disappear before morning. William shook his head. Leave it. But modify it. Remove all references to me and my men. Make it look like Amanda called for help. Officers responded, found her injured but refused medical transport. Make it ambiguous enough that no one asks follow-up questions. What about Caldwell? David asked, looking up from his own screen. His office has him scheduled for a budget review meeting at 9 a.m. When he doesn't show, people are going to notice. William took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. He'd been planning this part since the moment he'd seen Amanda's injuries, since he'd realized that Richard Caldwell wasn't just an abuser. He was a symptom of a larger rot in the city's power structure. Men like Caldwell didn't operate in isolation. They had enablers, people who looked the other way, colleagues who made excuses for their behavior. The entire system had failed Amanda Wilson long before she'd sent that desperate text. William intended to make sure everyone understood the consequences of that failure. Send an email from Caldwell's account, William said. Address it to his assistant and copy his department head. Say he's taking an emergency leave of absence for personal reasons. Keep it vague. Professional but clearly distressed. David's fingers flew across the keyboard. Timeline. Indefinite. Say he'll be in touch when circumstances allow. That'll buy us maybe a week before someone starts digging, Vincent observed. A week is all I need. William set down his coffee and picked up his phone, scrolling through a list of contacts. Marcus, I need you to access Caldwell's personal files. Bank accounts, emails, text messages, everything. I want a complete picture of his life. Looking for anything specific? Everything specific. William's voice carried the cold certainty of a man executing a plan already complete in his mind. Every woman he's dated. Every complaint filed and mysteriously dropped. Every payoff he's made to keep things quiet. Richard Caldwell didn't suddenly become an abuser. He's been one for years. I want proof. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. You're going to burn him. I'm going to expose him. William corrected. By the time I'm done, Richard Caldwell won't just be a missing person. He'll be a cautionary tale. Every man in this city who thinks his position protects him will think twice. Vincent moved to the wet bar in the corner, pouring himself 2 fingers of bourbon. What about Amanda? Her entire life is tied to Caldwell. Her address, her phone records, her medical history, it's all connected to him. When his disappearance hits the news, she becomes the obvious person of interest. Which is why Amanda Wilson is going to disappear too. The room went silent. Even Marcus stopped typing, turning to look at his boss with raised eyebrows. Explain, Vincent said carefully. William pulled up a new file on his tablet, one he'd been assembling for the past 2 hours. Amanda Wilson's life ended the night Richard Caldwell broke her ribs. What emerges from this is someone new. New identity, new background, new everything. We'll create a paper trail showing she left the city 3 weeks ago, before Caldwell's disappearance. Bought a bus ticket to Seattle, withdrew cash from an ATM, disappeared into a new life. And the real Amanda? Stays here. Under my protection. Under a new name with a new history. William looked up at Vincent, his expression brooking no argument. She'll have access to funds, credentials, everything she needs to start over properly. But the woman who was terrorized by Richard Caldwell ceases to exist in every database that matters. David was already pulling up identification templates on his screen. I'll need photographs. Personal details for the backstory. What are we thinking? Different state. Different country. Different life, William said simply. She gets to choose who she becomes. But whoever that is, she'll have nothing connecting her to Richard Caldwell or the woman who accidentally texted me for help. Vincent drained his bourbon and set the glass down with a soft clink. You're giving her witness protection without the witnesses. I'm giving her what the system failed to provide, actual protection. William stood, moving to the window that overlooked the estate grounds. In the distance he could see the wing where Amanda was recovering, the lights in her room dimmed but still visible. She sent a text message asking for help. Most people would have ignored it. The police would have shown up, taken a report, maybe even arrested Caldwell. Then the system would have processed him through courts that move at a glacial pace, granted him bail, allowed him access to his resources and connections. He would have found her. He would have finished what he started. Instead she texted you, Marcus said quietly. Instead she texted me. William turned back to face his men. And I don't operate within a system that fails women like her. I operate outside it. Which means when I eliminate a threat, it stays eliminated. When I offer protection, it's absolute. And when I clean someone's slate, it stays clean. Vincent pulled out his own phone, already making calls. I'll handle the logistics. New identity will be ready by the end of the week. What name? Let her choose, William said. She's had enough people making decisions for her. For the next 2 hours, William's team worked with the precision of a surgical strike. Marcus erased Amanda's presence from databases, modified police reports, and created a digital trail showing her departure from the city. David forged documents and established new accounts, building the framework of a new identity. Vincent coordinated with contacts across the city, ensuring that anyone who might ask questions about Richard Caldwell received answers that led nowhere. By the time the sun began to rise over the estate, Richard Caldwell's disappearance was a fait accompli. His email had been sent, his voicemail updated, his calendar cleared. And Amanda Wilson, the woman who'd sent a desperate text to a wrong number, was being carefully erased from every system that might lead her abuser's associates back to her. William stood at his window, watching dawn break over the grounds, his coffee long since gone cold. Somewhere in the house, Amanda was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, unaware that the man who'd saved her was systematically dismantling the architecture of her old life and preparing to give her something Richard Caldwell had spent 2 years destroying: the future. And the freedom to choose what that future looked like. 3 weeks had passed since the night Amanda Wilson sent a text message to the wrong number. She stood on the east balcony of William's estate, her hands resting on the wrought iron railing, watching the sun set over grounds that seemed to stretch into infinity. The evening air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. Her ribs had healed enough that she could breathe without wincing, though the memories of that night still woke her sometimes in the early morning hours. She was wearing clothes that actually fit. A simple black dress that William's people had procured along with an entire wardrobe she'd never asked for but desperately needed. Her hair, freshly cut by a stylist who'd come to the estate, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. The bruises on her face had faded to barely visible shadows, concealed beneath makeup applied by hands that were finally steady. She looked different. He felt different. Amanda Wilson, the woman who'd cowered on her bedroom floor, who'd believed she deserved the violence, who'd thought she was nobody, didn't exist anymore. Not in any database, not in any official record, not in any way that mattered. In her place stood someone new. Someone whose name was still being decided, whose future was still being written, but who no longer carried the weight of 2 years' worth of systematic destruction. "You should be resting." William's voice came from behind her, familiar now after 3 weeks of daily check-ins, medical updates, and careful conversations about what came next. Amanda turned to find him standing in the doorway to the balcony, dressed in his usual tailored perfection. Dark slacks, black shirt, the tattoos on his neck and arms visible in the fading light. He'd become less of an enigma over the past weeks, though she suspected she'd only scratched the surface of who William Horton truly was. "I've been resting for 3 weeks, she said, a hint of humor in her voice that surprised them both. Dr. Chen said I could start moving around more. Dr. Chen also said no strenuous activity for another month." William moved to stand beside her at the railing, his presence commanding but no longer threatening. She'd learned to read his moods in the small gestures. The set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes softened fractionally when he looked at her recovery progress. "Standing on a balcony isn't strenuous. For you, everything is strenuous right now." But there was no heat in his words, just the careful concern of someone who'd taken responsibility for her survival and refused to let her jeopardize it through impatience. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Amanda had spent countless hours on this balcony over the past weeks, learning the rhythm of the estate, watching William's men patrol the grounds with military precision, understanding that she was living in a fortress disguised as a home. "Vincent told me you've been asking questions," William said finally. "About what happens next?" Amanda nodded. She'd been carefully probing the limits of her situation, trying to understand whether she was a guest or a prisoner, whether William's protection came with expectations she hadn't been told about yet. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she admitted. "I can't go back to my old life. I can't contact anyone I knew before. I can't even use my own name. I'm grateful. God, I'm so grateful you saved me, but I don't know what I am now." William was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the sunset. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision he'd been considering for weeks. "You're under my protection," he said. "That's not temporary, Amanda. That's not something that expires when you heal. You sent a text to my number. Whether you meant to or not, you brought yourself into my world. And in my world, once someone is under my protection, they stay there. So I'm trapped here?" The words came out sharper than she intended, tinged with the fear that she'd escaped one prison only to enter another. "No." William turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "You're free to leave whenever you want. I'll provide you with your new identity, enough money to start over anywhere in the world, and the resources to disappear completely. No one will stop you. No one will follow you. But you'll always be under my protection. Whether you're here or halfway across the world, if anyone tries to hurt you, they'll answer to me. That's not negotiable. That's not something you can refuse." Amanda studied his face, trying to understand the man who'd burst into her life with such violence and had spent 3 weeks ensuring her recovery with such careful attention. Why? Because I made a promise the night my mother died. William's jaw tightened. I promised I would never be powerless again. That I would build something strong enough to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. You're one of those people now. That makes you my responsibility. I'm not your responsibility, Amanda said softly, though there was no anger in it, just a desire to understand the terms of her new existence. I'm not your obligation. No, William agreed. You're something more than that. The weight of those words hung between them, laden with implications neither seemed ready to fully explore. Amanda turned back to the sunset, processing everything he'd said. What happened to Richard? She asked quietly. She'd asked before and received vague answers. But 3 weeks had given her a strange clarity about what she wanted to know. He's alive, William said. But the life he knew is over. His reputation is destroyed. Evidence of his abuse, evidence of other victims, has been anonymously delivered to news outlets. His political career is finished. His freedom is gone. He exists in a cell that he'll never leave, contemplating the consequences of thinking his position made him untouchable. Amanda waited for the guilt to come, the horror at what she'd indirectly caused. But all she felt was a cold satisfaction that frightened her with its intensity. Good, she whispered. William glanced at her, something like approval flickering in his eyes. You're stronger than you think you are, Amanda Wilson. That's not my name anymore. No, William acknowledged. Who do you want to be? It was the question he'd been asking in various forms for 3 weeks. Who did she want to become? What name did she want to carry? What life did she want to build from the ashes of the one Richard Caldwell had tried to destroy? Amanda looked out over the estate, at the armed men patrolling the grounds, at the fortress that had become her sanctuary, at the sunset painting the sky in colors that seemed impossibly vivid after years of living in gray. She thought about the woman who'd sent that desperate text, who'd believed she was nobody, who'd accepted violence as the price of existence. That woman was dead. Erased from databases and memories alike. In her place stood someone who'd survived hell and emerged under the protection of the city's most dangerous man. Someone who no longer flinched at raised voices or sudden movements. Someone who was learning that survival wasn't the same as living, but that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to do both. I don't know yet, she said finally. But I know I'm not going anywhere. Not yet. William nodded as if this was the answer he'd been expecting. Then you stay. For as long as you need. He turned to leave, giving her the privacy she'd come to appreciate during her recovery. But Amanda's voice stopped him at the doorway. William. He looked back, waiting. Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For destroying him. For giving me the choice of what comes next. William's expression softened fractionally, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the monster. You saved yourself when you sent that text. I just made sure you survived long enough to realize it. Then he was gone, leaving Amanda alone on the balcony as night fell over the estate. She stood there for a long time, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, feeling the cool evening air on her skin, breathing deeply without pain for the first time in years. Amanda Wilson was dead. But someone new was being born. Someone who stood on the balcony of a crime lord's estate and felt, for the first time since she could remember, truly safe. Someone who was no longer a victim, but a woman under the protection of the most dangerous man in the city. And that, she was beginning to realize, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Thank you so much for watching. Your support truly means everything to me. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It only takes a second but helps immensely in bringing you more content like this. I've got another compelling video ready for you. Just click on it now to continue. See you in the next one.